I know you've heard about the homeless problem in Portland, Oregon. It's a situation that's just getting worse. We're going to begin our look at how bad it is here in downtown and then hop around to different areas of the city. In downtown proper, there's tents all over the place, but on the week I was in town, most of the tents were set up in one area, off of Burnside near Chinatown. But check back a different week and who knows where they'll be. They move around a lot since the city does periodic sweeps to clear tent camps from the downtown area for all the reasons you think they would. In 2015, the city estimated there were around 4,000 people who were homeless in Portland. At the time, it was announced that number was a 17% decrease from the last time they counted. We don't have an updated number of homeless in Portland today, but it's clear there's been a huge spike here. It's so bad, the city declared a homeless emergency. This place has gone from having an average of 6 large encampments before the pandemic to more than 100 encampments scattered throughout the city. Here's the latest map of where they are, but this changes daily. Portland spends a ton of money on the problem, but it's getting worse. The city's budget to tackle the homeless problem has increased by a lot. 4 years ago, Portland spent $47 million on the problem. The following year, Portland spent $57 million, then $71 million the next year, and this year, Portland spent a whopping $121 million on its homeless problem. In 1 year. In the last 6 years alone, the city has spent $286 million on homelessness. That's like $71,000 per person. Many people wonder where all the money's going, since the homeless numbers are only going up, not down. And Multnomah County has just announced it plans to spend $1 billion on this problem over the next 10 years. Part of that plan is buying up land all over the place so they can set up semi-permanent camping locations for large groups of people. But there's a new plan all the time. And don't forget about all the money Portland spends to clean up after the homeless. It can cost the city $20 grand to clean up just one small camp when they sweep them out of the area. There's been about 7,000 permanent housing units built in Multnomah County. They've been increasing the number of shelter beds, and they've increased the amount of mental health and drug addiction treatment programs. But again, the problem is only getting worse here. Here's one such maybe solution. This little teeny village is in the heart of downtown. It's made up of pallet houses, which cost about $7,000 each and can supposedly be assembled in an hour. There's a handful of other little homeless villages like this throughout the city and plans to build more. While Portland has a few hundred of these pallet homes set up, in Seattle, they've gone all in on the concept. They have more than 1,000 units like this built all over the city with plans to build more. Take the bright colored paint off and this would look like something you'd see in Central America. So Portland's new plan is to push people out of downtown and into self-sustained little villages like this. The city goes through periods when it actively sweeps homeless camps from the downtown area, though all that does is just push people out away from downtown and just scatters them into other parts of town, or they just come right back a week later. Apparently, weeks before I arrived, the city had done another big sweep, so what we're seeing right now is just a part of what was here for much of the year prior. But a question arises, does building everybody a home just incentivize people to not try to earn a living? I mean, why work when you can live for free? Well, apparently villages like this are supposed to be temporary to help people get back on their feet, and there's rules that are supposedly enforced. And some of these people do have jobs. Perhaps anywhere between 15 and 25% of homeless in Oregon are working homeless who just can't afford rent. The cost of living here has increased by more than 50% in the last decade. Wow. Now, some people say rent control's the answer, but sometimes that actually slows down affordable housing growth. Think about it. If they tell you how much profit you can make, you might not even build an apartment complex. It happened in Minneapolis when they added rent control. Entire much-needed cheap housing projects just stopped, and Portland's rent control is 3 times higher than in Minneapolis. There's an ongoing debate as to if cities like Portland are spending too much on trying to find a housing solution instead of working to get people stabilized with medical care and drug treatment. But drugs have been a fixture in Portland for decades now. I mean, Oregon was where the meth epidemic first began in the 80s. Portland's homeless problem goes way beyond just costing taxpayers tons of money. For one, it just looks terrible, and local businesses near this mess lose out on foot traffic. This type of crowd brings in a lot more drugs into the community, And Portland is now 6th in the nation for property crimes. That means thefts, vandalism, and break-ins. And a lot of that are the homeless people looking for easy ways to score quick cash for drugs and booze and money to survive. Nice neighborhoods all over Portland have to deal with prostitution, drug sales, drunk fights, the trash, the noise, and the looks of it all. People have learned if you call a city 1,000 times and complain, eventually they'll show up and clean a new camp up. But they're way understaffed. Portland has just a few contractors that show up and run the homeless people off. The city says it would take 2 years to remove all the trash and camps from the city just to get it back to where it was before the pandemic. And for every camp they clean up, 2 more spring up somewhere else. Here's an example of a typical day for tent removal in Portland. 14 sites on this day, including a middle school with some tents and RVs blocking the driveway, a vacant lot near Costco where homeless people had been there so long they were actually laying concrete and building homes. What the? The list goes on. But Portland makes drugs legal. They cut their police force by $15 million, and they got rid of a lot of their tent removal teams. The homeless problem in Portland has completely surrounded everything, and it's become a fabric of society here. It's just normal life now. There's no escaping it. Everyone here, homeless or not, is immersed in it. It's infected everything. No wonder a lot of people are leaving Portland. Of course, homelessness is not just a problem in Portland. Some studies say 1/4 of Americans now report being at imminent risk of losing their homes. And cities up and down the West Coast say they're overwhelmed by an unprecedented rise in homelessness, drug use, hazardous encampments, crime, and trash. Yeah, I mean, so can you give people an idea on how Portland's changed in the last 10 years? So that they can kind of understand.
So I used to come up here and visit all the time in the 90s when I was in the military and stuff, and it was a lot different then. And then when I moved up here in 2010, we had homeless, and we had it was almost like a hippie homeless thing. They were musicians, whatever, kids trying to get by, and they ended up on the street with the occasional homeless situation. Well, as the years progressed, I'd say around 2017, you could see there was a change. It started getting worse. By 2018, it was really bad. And a lot of that had to do with prices going up. People ended up on the street, couldn't afford apartments anymore. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, and it just blew up. But that's the biggest change. I mean, Portland is still a great city, and there's still a lot of things to do and a lot of nice places. It's just we got this, it's almost like we got a wart on our face that needs to be fixed, and we'll get back to the beauty that we once were. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how are you going to fix that problem? How are you going to get that wart off?
How to get that wart off your face? Well, they've said that they're going to start moving people off the streets. That's one of the biggest problems. So every city is going to have homeless people underneath the freeways and stuff like that, like I'd said. But they've gotten so bad here that they're just pitching a tent on the sidewalk throughout this one. Well, actually, most of the city. You can find pockets of it, but that Chinatown area is where it's really bad, where they've just set up full-on little cities on the sidewalks. And it's around businesses, and it's around apartment buildings, and those businesses are suffering. Nobody wants to go down there. It's just a horrible situation. So they've started to set up these areas where homeless people go camp, and they're trying to get these people off the sidewalks in front of these businesses. And I mean, it's a long process. You're dealing with human beings that, probably have some other issues going on besides being homeless. There's a reason they became homeless in a lot of cases. So they're starting to move these people to these like safe zones, as they call them, and hopefully get them off the street. And maybe that'll help. Maybe that'll help some of these businesses come back, more tax dollars, more money to help these people, get them going to where they need to go, or get them into an apartment, whatever is the case. But they're working on it. They started doing it a couple months ago. I haven't seen much movement on it, but they're working on it now.
Yeah, so what I'm showing right now is some of the tents that I shot downtown in Burnside. Is what people are seeing right now a lighter version of what there was? Was this problem Was it a lot worse than what I saw a couple weeks ago, or is this just about how it's been?
It's about how it's been. You might find certain areas, you might find a block where they've chased everyone out. But put it this way, let's say, 9 out of 10 blocks before would have full on homeless camps. Right now, it's sitting at about 7 out of 10. So there's been progress, but not that bad. And the other thing that I've noticed that maybe this is helping, it doesn't look like those little camps on the sidewalk have been there months and months, maybe a couple days now, and the police just got to get back around to chasing them out. But before, it looks like they were setting up whole cities along these sidewalks. That was one of the biggest problems. The longer they're there, the more problems are created. If they're just posting up a tent overnight, that's one thing. And that's sort of what it looks like now compared to before. That's what I would say about it. That's the progress.
Mm-hmm. Now drive around Portland and you'll find homeless encampments all over the place. Here's one in a city park on the north end of town. And soon we're going to see another one that's a mile long. And there's many, many others just like these. How many of these people are immigrants who just got here? Are there any? Seems like these are our people who have been here for a long time, not the poor who just arrived. Why is that? I did see some homeless encampments, but I mean, you can't avoid them in Portland at this point.
No, I mean, it's the whole I-5 corridor, honestly. I mean, people like to say like, oh, it's just Portland. It's not. I mean, it's basically like San Diego to Vancouver, BC is just, right? So it's not just like a city or statewide issue. It's like an entire regional issue. Yeah, I mean, I don't know of one place along the I-5 corridor that hasn't seen, and some of that just has to do with the convenience of being on that major, highway. It's very easy to travel back and forth. And a lot of the cities along that are notorious for having lots of resources, like good resources, and laxer laws in other parts of the country when it comes to people who are just, living outside the bounds of normal society.
But like, what brings like the bad people there? Because I agree, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, like what's the draw for the homeless and druggies and all the low lives that are kind of making your place suck?
There's a lot of resources for them. Portland has lots and lots of like shelters and just a lot of tolerance. The city a couple of years ago, it must have been after 2011, kind of when the whole Occupy Wall Street thing happened. A lot of laws were just sort of cut that allowed people to camp out more freely. So, and just since I've been back since 2015, I've seen so many more just encampments in the most random places. And it's like, okay. So that's a huge draw. The other thing is our winters are pretty mild and our summers are usually pretty mild. So weather-wise, it's a lot more tolerable. It's like if you're homeless in Chicago, you can't be there in the winter, you're going to die. But in Portland, you stand a much better chance of being able to be out on the streets, not necessarily in a shelter for most of the year and be okay. So that's like... And also the I-5 corridor, I talked about that makes it very easy for people to move up and down and get from city to city. So you could like easily jump down to California if you needed to during the winter time and then come up to Portland during the summer and just kind of chase the better weather. It is kind of ironic. Oregon is definitely in like the bottom 5 states in terms of mental health treatment. So we're terrible at mental health treatment. We see a lot of people on our streets here with serious mental health issues. It's terrible. A lot of state institutions got shut down in I want to say the 80s or something, when a lot of those major mental health institutions were shut down. And a lot of those people did end up on the streets. The system is really, even though we have a lot of resources, things are really backlogged right now because of how much need there is. So that's also that's been really tough. That's definitely increased how many people are living without aid. I'd say like probably community is a big one as well. A lot of homeless communities, they have a lot of good connection within that world. It's not like all random chaos the way it might look to you or I. A lot of them have a lot of structure. They are in contact with people across the country. So I think people really are traveling to be with like their friends or, the people that they like to spend time with as well. I think that's a big part of it.
Mm-hmm. So you said earlier that you spend time with some of the homeless folks. Is that because like what you do, because work at the hospital, or do you go down and talk to them? Like what do you like? Why are you so involved with like talking to those folks?
I started a couple years ago, and I haven't recently just because work that takes up a lot of time. But while I was in nursing school and a little bit before that, I was running a little outreach program where it started out with us just making first aid kits and handing them out. And that was always really fun. I really liked doing that. I took a couple of groups out of people I knew from like school and whatnot. And then once I got into nursing school, I had been working as a nurse aide at a hospital for a while. And I just noticed that there's a lot of kind of unnecessary friction between healthcare staff and people living on the streets. And it was mostly coming from a lack of like total misunderstanding of like these people's living situations. And so in nursing school, I started a little outreach program. It was called like street nursing. I think it's still running. I pass it off to a couple students there, and we just would go. We found a spot in Southeast Portland where we would just go and literally set up like a foot washing station and just provide like really basic skincare. And I would use it as an opportunity just to kind of ask a lot of questions. I'm a question asker, and I'd be like very curious, like just asking them, what is it like to live out here? Do you use X, Y, and Z drugs? Like, how is that for you? Just things like that. And it was a really positive experience. The students that I would bring out there, they loved it. For a lot of them, it was the first time they'd been exposed to like real poverty, and people just living in a much rougher way than they had ever, seen. And then for me, it just like helped sort of paint a better idea of like what these communities were experiencing. And it's very varied. I would say, yeah, the vast majority of them are always very willing to share their entire life with you. Once they know you're really just interested and curious, like they're usually pretty, open to talking. Definitely ran into a lot of people with mental health issues for sure. And, it's always a little bit difficult to tell, like, is it because of certain drugs that they're on? Is it, actually because they're not on certain medications, whatever. There's just a lot of it.
Is there like a common theme? And there's probably not, but like if you talk to a bunch of people, like, was there one common theme that you came away with after spending time with those people for a while? Like that you were like, you could summarize it, or is it just like all over the place in terms of experiences and background and everything?
I would say, I would say the common themes are mental health and drug use. And those two they're closely tied. So those would be the two big ones for sure.
Were they on, like, for a lot of them, did seem like, I'm a percentage guy. What percentage of the people that you sat down with and spent time with were on drugs at the time that you actually were interacting with them?
Oh, that's tough. I wouldn't be able to give a percentage. Some people are really high functioning when they're using, it's tough because I would talk to people who maybe they take like a hit of meth every morning, like they would their morning coffee. And it's like what gets them going in the morning. And they're
just
okay.
functioning. Yeah.
You're just like, okay.
Microdosers.
Yeah, basically. But then you would have people where, they might be in like a full-blown psychosis from heavily using meth that day. I would say for the most part, the people that we were interacting with where we were at were not on anything currently as we were interacting with them. And if somebody was causing trouble at all, the rest of everybody else would basically self-monitor and like move that person away. So they were very respectful of like us being there. They were very grateful that we were there.
Yeah, they just self-monitor themselves.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Do you like of the people you talk to? Do you have any idea on like what percentage of them do you feel will one day figure it out and get off the streets and lead a normal life?
I have no idea. That one is really, really tough. I would say I talked to a lot of more middle-aged people who had come from backgrounds where they had housing and jobs, and just sort of steadily over the years, things just went really badly for them, or they just made really bad decisions. And I would say a lot of them kind of get to this point where, maybe they've been in, subsidized housing or Section 8 housing before, they've been kicked out, back in. I would say for a lot of those people, they're probably going to be struggling with this for the rest of their life until they end up so medically impaired that the state places them in like a nursing home or skilled facility, which is quite frankly what we do all the time at the hospital, is a lot of placement for people. So as for the younger homeless population, I haven't interacted with them as much. They tend to be a little bit more, like a little harder to track down, a little bit, just in my experience, and maybe this was just the location of where we were at, but they are also, they tend to be using a lot more. I had a woman tell me that she was kind of local to the area we were at. And she said she does rounds every night to check on the younger people to make sure they hadn't overdosed. Yeah.
So I saw the tiny village home thing that you guys have set up in your downtown area, over by Burnside.
Yeah.
I think it looked like there are about 50 little small pallet homes that were set up. Is that going to be the solution to help these people, is to like put them on little teeny homes all over the place? Or like, I mean, how do you even start?
This is such a popular conversation. Like, what's the solution? Man, I don't even know. I have heard, well, for one thing, I think the problem is so large and so overwhelming that it is going to take probably a complete shift in focus from how we are performing right now. I have heard from people who are smarter than me and know more about this than me that it has less to do with available housing and has more to do with treatment and lack of good treatment, especially for addiction. So I do know that up here, there is a lot of housing available, but waiting lists are up to 3 years long. But once you get into housing, there isn't like a lot of opportunity for you to receive good treatment for your addiction. And then a lot of those people end up using while they're in housing and getting kicked out again. So it's like, what was even the point? So yeah, I don't think the solution is just letting people live in teeny little houses everywhere. I mean, that's like, isn't that just like the precursor to a slum? And that's not, I don't see how that's better. I know that like something, should happen. Like this is not a good situation for anybody. It's not good for, people in my position. It's not good for them. So I don't really know. Yeah.
Yeah. Does it seem like things are getting, so you're at the hospital, you deal with some of these people, right? That come
Yeah.
in,
Mm-hmm.
and you spend time and try to treat them. Does it seem like the problem is worse? Meaning, are people like a little bit of like a different mental state than they were a few years ago? Like, or is it just the same thing every month, every year?
I would say, I would say things were pretty bad prior to 2020. Things were pretty bad. I'd say like all of these, systems like the healthcare system and like mental health and all this stuff was pretty much headed for some kind of collapse. And then we had 2020, and that literally just sort of shoved everything along and just sped it up maybe 10 years. And now I would say that absolutely we are seeing much higher acuity of not just like physical ailments, but also just like mental health ailments. I would say most of my patients have some sort of issue that's been exacerbated by the last 2 years. Whether they are homeless or not, it doesn't really seem to matter. They're not doing super well.
And some of them are so bad, you actually have to try to help transition them into like a supervised 24/7 kind of place.
So that's really typical. That is kind of how things have happened for a really long time, is that once people get to a place where their health needs are requiring, a certain level of care, we can't really discharge them back out to say like their situation on the streets. It might not be safe. It's just not safe for them. Or discharge them back to their house where they were living independently, So when that happens, and obviously people can always say they absolutely don't want to do that and go back to their situation. They almost always will end up back in the hospital, but they do have that choice. We do try to transition them into a higher level of care facility, and that's usually in the form of like a skilled nursing facility or like a long-term care facility of some sort, which, they're getting a higher level of care there, but those places are also usually very full and have long waiting lists as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm hearing a lot of the same stuff that's going on in San Francisco with, some of these people, number one, they don't know where to go.
Yeah.
So you've got these people, especially the younger ones, they get sort of semi-sober around like 1 PM, and then they're like, okay. And then they've got a few hours to kind of try to figure out, if I need help, where do I go? And they don't have phones, and they get all stuck. And then by the time they fall into a cycle that here's a guy with some drugs, and then they start the cycle all over again the next day. And a lot of them don't even know where to go to get treatment. And then the treatment, the beds, if they were to find one that would help them, they're usually like, hey, come back in a week. We can put you in a bed. Sometimes it's a month until they can get them in there. And by that time, they're going to be like back to using. And those are the ones that kind of think like, okay, I'm going to try to sober up and try to stop the cycle. And then if you have a week or a month to try to sit and wait, like you're not going to make that. Good luck waiting till tomorrow. They need someone to take them in right now, sit down, and let's get you back to where they're going. And, the city's spending, I think 75% of their money trying to figure out an affordable housing problem, and only 25% on mental health and drug treatment. And a lot of people are like, shouldn't it be the other way around? Because the biggest problem is like getting people to be like normal, and then they can maybe go figure out their own housing situation instead of just putting them in a little teeny house where they're just going to keep using, and you can't build that many houses for all the people. So I don't know why people feel like they it's happening where you're at too. I just don't understand why they don't just flip a switch and start treating these people, spend a lot of money and resources on trying to get these people like mentally safe and sane and off the shit, and then solve the problem of like, where can we put them now? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. There's a lot of laws within the medical world that, I think can make it difficult as far as like, especially with mental health. For example, if you are in the middle of a mental health crisis and you really need to be like, held at the hospital, it can be really, really, really difficult if you don't have someone already, signed up as your like legal decision maker. If you don't have someone in that position already, it's almost impossible to legally keep that person in that safe place in the hospital until they're better. You almost just like have to let them go, or, get them to a place where they're just good enough that they can go back out. Right. And so you see this like really horrible cycle all the time of people like coming in to get treatment, finally getting treatment, getting a little bit better. And then, they feel good and they think, oh, I'm fine. And they want to discharge or like leave. And they do, because we have no legal right to hold them, which can be really difficult because a lot of people maybe aren't really able to make those decisions clearly. So it can get really sticky from that point of view. I don't know what's happening. Like, I don't know what is happening with like the money that we pay in taxes for this stuff. I don't know how it's getting divvied up and who's making those decisions. I probably should look into it.
I mean, you seem like you guys are very frustrated. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of stuff that needs. It seems like a lot of you're in a hospital. Are a lot of medical professionals frustrated with what they're seeing coming into the hospital? I guess so.
I don't know one nurse, one doctor, one nursing aide that isn't like totally burned out right now. And it's not like, I know on news media, they make it sound like it's because we have all these COVID patients. It's not true. It's definitely not helped, but we're burned out because the need is so intense and there's just not a lot that we're able to do. We basically get people stable enough, and this is just like healthcare in general. They're stable enough, and then you push them out the door. So.
Yeah, this is it. This is it. Oh my God. Holy shit. It's like the whole street. Hey everyone, so it's pretty clear by now that elected leaders aren't going to help you. If you don't like what you saw in this video, demanding change won't work. You're going to have to do it on your own. If you want to be safe and want your community to be a place where people want to live, you're going to have to clean the place up yourselves. You're going to have to work with your friends and neighbors to lower crime. Politicians clearly don't care as much anymore. It's up to us.
This is Sage, Nick's manager. This has been a Corner House Entertainment production.
And are you looking to move and need advice? I do consulting. That's right. I'll sit down and talk about where the next perfect place for you and your family should be. I do it all the time. Together, let's find you a new home that's safe and checks all your boxes. You can get my email in the description to find out how I can help you find your perfect relocation.